Bruce Lee was mocked, "You're just a movie star," by Frazier. His answer shut Joe down instantly. The answer that echoed forever. The gym was stuffy, sweat dripping down the temples of the fighters who crowded around the makeshift ring. Joe Frazier, with his smirk and shoulders as broad as a bull, crossed his arms and looked at Bruce Lee with disdain. "You're just a movie star, Lee. Those movies of yours are pretty, but here? This is real life. You're nothing more than a dancer with pretty punches." The crowd murmured, some laughed. Bruce didn't move. His eyes, dark and razor-sharp, remained fixed on Frazier. He knew this wasn't just a verbal challenge, it was a test. A test of respect, of legitimacy. And Bruce Lee never ran away from a test. Then, without warning, he moved. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a kick. It was a shift, a sidestep so quick it seemed like an illusion. In the blink of an eye, Bruce was behind Frazier, his right hand landing lightly on the champion's shoulder. Not a blow, not a threat. Just one touch. A reminder. "Do you think fighting is just strength, Joe?" His voice was calm, almost a whisper, but each word cut through the air like a razor. "You push, I slide. You attack, I disappear. You think you have me, but I'm already behind you." Frazier spun around, his fists clenched, but Bruce was no longer there. He had taken 2 steps away, hands relaxed at his sides, as if he were in a park, not in a ring about to explode. Fighting isn't about who hits harder. It's about who doesn't need to hit. It's about who makes the other make mistakes before they even start. Bruce tilted his head, an almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "And you, champion, you've already made a mistake." The silence that followed was heavy. Frazier was breathing deeply, his muscles still tense, but something in his eyes had changed. It was no longer disdain, it was calculation. He had underestimated the man in front of him, and now he knew it. Then, without saying anything else, Bruce turned and walked towards the exit. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. But before leaving the gym, he stopped for a moment, looking over his shoulder. "When you're ready to learn, Joe, come to me. But don't expect me to be kind." The confrontation that never happened. The following days were filled with murmurs. Frazier, too proud to admit that he had been humiliated without a single blow, began training with an intensity that frightened even his most experienced sparring partners. He watched Bruce Lee films, not to laugh, but to study. Every movement, every angle, every breath. He wanted to understand. Meanwhile, Bruce returned to Los Angeles, where the success of Enter the Dragon made him a living legend. But something bothered him. It wasn't the fame, nor the money. It was the feeling that, despite everything, there were still people who doubted him. Not as a fighter, but as a philosopher of fighting. Then, one warm night in 1973, the phone rang. "Lee?" The voice on the other end was hoarse but unmistakable. "It's Frazier." Bruce didn't say anything. Just waited. "I want to train with you. Not for a fight. To learn." There was a pause. Then, Bruce smiled. "You're going to have to come here. And bring an open mind." The legacy of touch. They never fought. Not officially. Not for the cameras or the public. But for 3 months, in a hidden dojo on the outskirts of Hong Kong, Bruce Lee and Joe Frazier met every morning before dawn. Frazier learned that brute force was just one tool, not the only one. Bruce, in turn, discovered that even the most stubborn bulls could be guided if you knew where to touch. Years later, when Bruce died suddenly, Frazier was one of the few fighters to attend the funeral. He didn't say much. He just stood next to the coffin for a long time, then placed a boxing glove on his friend's chest. "You were right, Lee. I made a mistake. But I learned." And, silently, he turned and walked away. The fight never happened. But the lesson? That one, yes, lasted forever. The legacy of the forgotten dojo. The years passed, and the memory of those mornings in Hong Kong became a closely guarded secret. Frazier, now with scarred fists and a soul heavier than any belt could ease, carried with him something that no ring had ever given him: respect for movement. Not the raw movement, but the precise, the calculated one, the one that made a 100-pound man seem as light as a leaf in the wind. He never talked about Bruce in interviews. He never mentioned the training, the punches that missed by inches, the knees that almost knocked him down when he tried to imitate the fluidity of Jeet Kune Do. But behind the scenes, something has changed. Frazier started training differently. Less strength, more timing. Less anger, more patience. And when he stepped into the ring, even against younger, faster opponents, there was something in his eyes that wasn't there before: the shadow of a smile. The last round. In 1975, Frazier faced George Foreman for the third time. He wasn't the same Smokin' Joe anymore. The body no longer responded as before, and Foreman, younger and hungrier, massacred it. In the fifth round, a left hook knocked him down. He fell to his knees, blood running from the corner of his mouth, his eyes cloudy. But before he got up, something strange happened. He saw Bruce. Not a hallucination, not a ghost, just the clear memory of that morning when Lee, with a light touch on the shoulder, made him understand that defeat was not the end, but the beginning of something new. Frazier smiled. And then, with an effort that seemed impossible, he stood up. The referee stopped the fight. Foreman raised his arms in victory. But Frazier didn't care. He walked to the corner, took off his gloves and held them to his chest, as he had done years before in front of Bruce's coffin. It wasn't surrender. It was gratitude. The epilogue. Years later, already retired, Frazier opened a small gym in Philadelphia. It wasn't a place for champions, but for kids no one else wanted to coach: the rowdy ones, the violent ones, the ones who believed strength was everything. He taught them how to breathe. To watch. Waiting for the right moment. One day, a thin young black man with sharp eyes and quick fists walked into the gym. Frazier watched him for a while, then approached. "You fight like you have something to prove," he said, crossing his arms. The boy stared at him, defiantly. "And you fought as if you had nothing to lose." Frazier laughed, a hoarse laugh, like someone who had seen it all. "I had it. I just didn't know it yet." He extended his hand. "Come on. Let's see if you learn faster than me." And so, without spotlights, without cameras, Bruce Lee's lesson continued. Not in movies, not in manuals, but in the quiet of a gymnasium, where two men, an old champion and a young rebel, discovered that the real fight never ends. It just changes shape. The weight of shadows. The boy was called Elias. And, as Frazier had noted, he fought as if the ring was the only place his scars made sense. Not the visible marks, although there were some, thin and pale on the knuckles, witnesses of bad nights in Baltimore alleys, but the others. The ones that throbbed inside when he closed his eyes and saw his father walking out the door for the last time, or his mother crying over bills that would never be paid. Frazier didn't ask. Not at first. He just offered him a new punching bag, worn-out gloves, and a warning: "Here, you hit the leather, not the flesh. If you want to break something, break your own pride first." Elias accepted the challenge. But not without resistance. The first few months were a dance of provocations and silences. Frazier taught with gestures, not words, an adjustment in posture, a long look when Elias exposed his chin, a grunt of approval when he finally stopped charging like a hurricane and began to watch. "The fight is not about strength," said the old man, beating his own chest. "It's about what you can handle here." Elijah hated this. He hated the patience, he hated the waiting, he hated the way Frazier seemed to know exactly when he was about to lose control. One afternoon, after taking a clean punch in sparring, something that hadn't happened since he arrived at the gym, he exploded. "Why don't you teach me how to hit harder, instead of standing there talking shit about breathing?" Frazier didn't move. He just took off his gloves, slowly, and threw them on the bench. Because you already know how to hit hard. The problem is that you don't know how to fall. Elijah advanced. 1 punch. 2. Frazier dodged the first, blocked the second with his forearm and, in one fluid movement, spun the boy around, pinning him against the wall with one arm twisted behind his back. Do you want to prove that you're tough? She whispered in his ear. Then prove that you know how to lose. Because everyone loses, Elias. The difference is what you do afterwards. The boy struggled, but Frazier didn't let go. Not until he stopped fighting. Over time, Elijah learned. Not just fighting, but seeing the gaps in his opponent, the patterns in his movements, the way fear or arrogance left openings bigger than any lowered guard. And, little by little, he stopped seeing Frazier as an obstacle. The old man was no longer the man who held him against the wall, but the one who showed up with a bottle of water after training, the one who suddenly asked, "Does your mother still work the night shift?" The one who, one cold morning, left a worn-out coat on the bench with a note, "Don't die of pneumonia before you beat me." But the real lesson came the day Elijah finally defeated him. It wasn't a knockout. It wasn't even a clear point. It was a moment, a single instant when Frazier let his guard down, distracted, and Elias, for the first time, waited. Didn't attack. Observed. And when the punch came, he dodged and counterattacked with precision, knocking the old man down with a right cross that echoed through the empty gym. Frazier lay on the ground for a second, panting, before laughing. Took a long time, damn it. Elijah extended his hand to help him up. But when Frazier grabbed her, she pulled him into a quick, rough hug, like a man who doesn't know how to show affection in any other way. "Now you are ready," said the old man. But not to win. To survive. Years later, Elias would be in Las Vegas, fighting for the light heavyweight belt. The gym where he trained was modern, full of cameras and sponsors, and his name was no longer just the kid Frazier trained, but a champion on the rise. But on fight night, when the announcer announced his name and the lights blinded him, he closed his eyes for a second. And he breathed. He didn't think about technique. He didn't think about strategy. He thought of the smell of sweat and leather in the old gym, of Frazier's husky voice saying, "Wait for the moment," of the way the old man never let him give up, even when he wanted to. The gong sounded. Elijah advanced. The fight lasted 12 rounds. 12 rounds of blood, sweat, and an opponent who was not just a fighter, but a punching machine, a former champion who didn't know how to lose. Elias took punches that made him see stars, that made him stagger, that made him, at one point, kneel in the ring and think, "That's it. It's over." But then he remembered. He remembered Frazier, lying on the floor of that old gymnasium, laughing. He remembered that the fight wasn't about not falling. It was about getting up. And when the last round began, Elias was on his feet. The knockout came in the final minute. A perfect, clean uppercut that lifted the opponent off the ground and made him collapse like a bag of sand. The gym exploded. The judges didn't need to count. Elias raised his arms, but did not look at the audience. He looked among the cameras and flashes for a face that wasn't there. Frazier watched on television, in a random bar in Detroit, with a half-finished beer and a smile on his face. When the announcer shouted "New light heavyweight champion," he raised the bottle in a silent toast. "Good boy," he murmured. And turned off the TV. Elias never fought at the old gym again. The place closed years later, swallowed by a parking lot. But sometimes, when the weight of fame or self-doubt was suffocating him, he would drive there at night, park the car, and stare at the empty concrete, where there had once been a ring, punching bags, and an old man who had taught him that the real fight was never against another. It was against himself. And, in that silence, he breathed. I watched. I was waiting for the right moment. Between cameras and flashes. Frazier left the bar with the bitter taste of beer still on his tongue, but his chest light. The frigid Detroit air cut like a blade, but he didn't care. He walked through the deserted streets, His hands stuck in the pockets of his worn coat, his steps firm despite the years of blows that had left his body scarred. He was no longer the trainer he once was, the one who shouted instructions from the corner of the ring while the fighters struggled under the lights. Now he was just an old man who knew a champion when he saw one. Elijah had been the last. The gym where it all began was gone, but Frazier still drove by sometimes, just to see the parking lot lit by streetlights, the cracked asphalt where the entrance once was. He remembered the first day the boy arrived, too thin, his eyes wide as if he had seen a ghost. "I want to fight," he had said, his voice shaking. Frazier had almost laughed. But something in those eyes had made him stop. It wasn't fear. It was hunger. Elijah had won that night. Not in the ring, not yet, but in the decision to return the next day. The years had passed like a well-placed punch, fast, precise, relentless. Elias had risen up the ranks, defeated opponents who seemed invincible, collected belts and scars. But fame had a price. Sponsors wanted smiles, not truths. Fans wanted blood, not strategy. And the prosecutors? They just wanted numbers. "You look different," a journalist had once told him, after a fight in Las Vegas. Elias had looked at her, his knuckles still swollen, sweat drying on his skin. "Like this?" The woman hesitated, as if the words might hurt him. "Before, you fought as if you had nothing to lose. Now, it seems like you're fighting to not lose what you already have." He hadn't responded. He had just put on his robe and left the locker room, leaving the question hanging in the air like a badly delivered hook. The night that everything changed was the same night that Frazier showed up at the new gym, the one with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, state-of-the-art equipment, and an entire wall dedicated to trophies Elias didn't even know he had. The old man entered without warning, like old times, and stood at the door, watching Elias train with a sparring partner who could barely keep up with his movements. "It's quick," muttered Frazier, when the training was over. Elias wiped his face with a towel. "Thanks. But he's not fighting." The sparring partner discreetly walked away. Elijah took a deep breath. "What are you talking about?" Frazier pointed to the mirrors. "Before, you looked at the ring and saw the enemy. Now, you look and see yourself. And it paralyzes you." Elijah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Did you come here to lecture me?" "I came to remind you that fighting isn't just about winning. It's about falling, getting up and understanding why you fell. You stopped falling, boy. And that's dangerous." Elias threw the towel on the floor. "I don't need advice. I need a coach who doesn't disappear when things get tough." Frazier was unfazed. "I never disappeared. You're the one who stopped looking for me." Silence. The weight of those words fell on Elias like an uppercut. He remembered the nights when, after humiliating defeats, Frazier would show up on his doorstep with a bottle of whiskey and a bag of ice. "We only lose when we stop learning," the old man had once said. Elijah swallowed. "Okay," he said finally. "What do you suggest?" Frazier smiled, his teeth yellowed with age. "Go back to basics. No cameras. No audience. Just you, the ring and the fear." And that's how, 2 weeks later, Elias found himself back in the parking lot where the gym used to be. There was no ring, of course. But there was the concrete, the biting wind and, most of all, the silence. He took off his gloves and left them on the hood of the car. He took off his boots. And then, with his bare feet, he started running in circles, like he did when he was a kid with no sponsorships, no contracts, nothing but a dream and a stubborn old man who believed in him. Frazier watched him from the sidewalk, his hands in his pockets, his coat flapping. "I didn't say anything. It didn't need to." Elijah ran until his lungs burned. He ran until his legs shook. He ran until he understood that, in the end, the only fight that really mattered was the one he fought against the version of himself he was afraid of losing. When he stopped, Panting, sweat mixing with the cold of the night, he looked up at the sky. Detroit's stars were few, overshadowed by the city's lights. But he saw them. And smiled. Because, after all, the ring had never been made of concrete. It was made of choices.